the false narrative, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Shut Up and Work podcast. I am your host, the coach, and along with me is SJ. SJ, how are you doing?
Hey, everybody. I'm doing pretty good. I hope everybody's doing well today.
Awesome. And today we're going to kind of discuss this false narrative that's been thrown out. And I know it's been more on the political side of things of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. And I'm going to tell you the reason why I call it this BS false narrative. Well, first, let's kind of just delve into history a little bit. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but let's just kind of do a little timeline overview. So, first of all, this phrase, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, it originated, I would say around the late 1800s or maybe the very beginning of the 20th century. So it came about with that time frame or whatever. Maybe it was an old poster board or something back then. You ride by on your wagon and see the little poster on the side of the road. But often this phrase lately has been thrown at Black Americans, or if you call yourself an African American, that's fine. And SJ, I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes I have taken offense to that when certain people, mainly in the political arena, have thrown that term towards Black and African Americans. And I'm sure you have heard it too in the last, let's just say in the last 15 years, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Many times.
Yeah. And for people out there, I want you to know this is not supporting a typical political party, because one thing I want you to know, it's been thrown out by both sides of the political aisle or the political party. Matter of fact, it was thrown out by a president that I voted for the first time in his first term. I'll just put it that way. I'll let y'all do the mystery and I will come back later and solve it or something. So anyway, getting back to what I was saying. So with that, this is what I want to make clear. And for those of you that may not know out there, I just want to educate people a little bit on this. Now, when Black people, when we were kept in bondage, or our ancestors were kept in bondage in this country, we were not able to read, we were not able to do math, we were not able to do anything that was going to educate us. Okay, that was part of the reason of our enslavement. So by the time when slavery had ended, my ancestors were so hungry for knowledge that we became educated, we built our own schools, and the Black man, Black woman, and Black children became the fastest educated people ever in the history of this country. Let's just keep it like that. And then moving on, not only were we becoming fast and vastly educated, we were starting to do things like become senators and congressmen and stuff like that. And then what started happening during this time, right? Especially when 13th, the 14th, 15th amendments were getting passed during the 1860s, 1870s, and during that time frame. We started being terrorized, especially in the South. Okay. Groups, white nationalist groups or terrorism groups such as the KKK and those things started being formed from old Confederate generals and soldiers who were too cowardly to fight the Civil War on the battlefield, who may have ran away or deserted. They started forming hate groups and started doing things like attacking us and lynching us. But still, nevertheless, we kept it pushing. We kept moving on. We had heroes like Booker T. Washington, who in the late 1890s went out and gave a speech in Atlanta, Georgia, of all places, during that time in the South, deep in the South, at the Cotton States and International Exposition, which he was basically saying that, hey, in the social climate, he was like, look, we can be separate as fingers on the hand, but we're one as the hand for all things essential for mutual progress. Now, basically, all he was wanting to do was he was just saying, leave us alone. We'll do our thing. We'll stay out of y'all's way and everything, and let us be. Let us live. But oh shit, no, they couldn't have that happen, right? They like, no, no, no. We need to see what y'all are doing. And black people from the late 1800s to the turn of the century, all the way up into the First World War, we were thriving in this country. We had built our own towns. We had our own needs being met. We had our own stuff. And this is not just in the South, this was in the North too.
So,
And
Coach, what you mean is we were actually separate and equal?
we were moving. We were moving and grooving. We were damn near past equal. I mean, I'm just saying. And there's plenty of books, there's plenty of things to read on this. And of course, if you live in a state where the governor is trying to ban the books, just go online and you'll find information. Now, what happened after the Great World War One? That's when a whole bunch of pissed off white people and other immigrants, because let's not get the game twisted. A lot of people, oh no, my family, I was Italian or I was Irish, da da da, like that, like you were really separated. Yeah, at terms when y'all sat together at a table, yes, you were separated. You may have been discriminated against because of your language or something like that. But guess what? They participated in some of these, what I call racial hostilities, especially after World War One. Some of them happened before World War One, where our suburb cities and towns and developments were burned to the ground. Many black people were murdered. Or there's been cases to where towns have been flooded, right? And buried. There's been cases, as you look at the Central Park, that used to be a black neighborhood right there in New York City. And what the people did to destroy that, to run the black people off and turn it into a park in that neighborhood. So I could get into that. I can get it into real depth on these things, but just for now, just for this episode, let me kind of just get to the point here. So moving on down the timeline. In the South, what did you have? Then you had things like Jim Crow that was being instilled. And don't get it twisted. Once again, the people in the North, they also had a Jim Crow. There was a similar part of it, but they wasn't as brutal with it. You lived in the cities of Chicago, Detroit, New York, places like that. You went on the wrong side of town, you were going to come up missing. And you were going to have that same racial hostility that was going on in the southern states, cities, and towns. Moving on. So then, once all our stuff was destroyed, like Tulsa, Black Wall Street, massacre, all across, even here in the state of Texas, you can read about the town of Slocum. They had a massacre where the whites just came into that town and started killing blacks because the blacks seem to be doing either on an equal level as good or better in that situation. So then moving on, they handicapped us then, and then they passed more laws to keep us from rebuilding, reinvesting, rebuilding up our own communities. Bank laws, housing laws, all kinds of things were passed through our government, our Senate and Congress to handicap us even more. So then finally we said, well, shit, okay, this is what y'all want us to do. Let's go integrate the 50s and the 60s. We got to fight for civil rights, just to have basic rights to walk down the street and not be shot. So then when we fought for that, and did all these things. And then, of course, the welfare system came into our neighborhoods. It existed well before it was handed out to black people. But then once they started putting the welfare system in, mainly in the cities up north, telling black women that you don't have to work. And as long as you keep the black man out of the household. Now, when all these women are having babies out of wedlock, now they have the nerve to turn around and say,
Oh, yeah. Why are these people on welfare? They need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps.
well, mother, look at what you did for over a century to sabotage it when we were pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps. So, anyway, SJ, I was just kind of giving a timeline on those things. Go ahead. If I want to hear your thoughts.
It just never ceases to amaze me the systemic racism that has been ingrained in this country in our history. And as much as I hate to admit it, I am still learning so much just in the last few years. I mean, really, the murder of George Floyd is what brought a lot of this to light and to the forefront. Not that people have not been screaming this and publishing it and talking about it and trying to educate us for years, because they have. But unfortunately, I was not in the right spaces and I did not have the right influences and access to find this kind of information. But it just never ceases to amaze me that this country was specifically built to continuously use, abuse, oppress, and massacre Black people.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. But the history is there when it's not being obscured, when it's not being left out, when it's not being lied about. I was amazed to find that, yes, because, I've thought about this many, many times over the years. I've had many discussions. I went to a historically Black college and university on purpose. And I've talked about it many times over the years. Why can't we as a community, why can't we as Black people, quote, get ourselves together like other ethnic groups have? The Jewish people, Hispanic communities, Asian communities, Middle Eastern communities, people from all different countries and all different regions come to the United States as immigrants, quote unquote, and they're able to build communities and sustain themselves and have businesses. Yeah, because the American government was not purposely shutting them down, burning them down, making laws to restrict them and oppress them to keep them from having successful businesses. There were so many reasons and so many obstacles and so many ways that we have been purposefully kept and destroyed. Not just that you're trying to keep us from getting this, but when we do have it, you destroy it. And there's no consequence for that. Unbelievable, and it's disgusting.
Yeah. And great point that you brought up. And I'll back up a little bit because that's another thing that's thrown in our face. And that's kind of how that pull yourself up by the bootstraps, because the second part of that excuse,
Well, other people from other countries come here and they do well.
well, so let's back up a little bit. Let's go back to the Nixon administration after Lyndon Baines Johnson, where they installed a policy, the Monahan Monuments policy, which basically says benign and neglect Black people. Okay, so hey, we're going to give you this partially civil rights bill, but what that civil rights bill actually did, that's why it's key that people really pay attention to Martin Luther King's speech, where he says all people are holding hands and little boys and little girls are playing together. So the idea that they came up with is said, hey, once again, just like the old days in the early 15, 16, 1700s, we're going to flood or bring in immigrants. Now, what's the whole purpose of bringing in these immigrants from different countries? Because they wanted to create a buffer class between white folks and Black folks. And the rule is, because I'm sure you've seen it, SJ, in your old neighborhoods, you go in the Black neighborhood in the 80s. In the early 80s, you probably had like a Jewish person running the neighborhood store. Then the late 80s on into the early 90s, you had a Japanese or Korean person running the store. Now, after the 2000s, you have someone from Southwest Asia running the store, Indian, Arab, or Pakistani or something into that nature. So, real quick, the benign neglect thing is that we want to make other people come before black people. And once again, as I stated and as you stated, SJ, it is our government that's doing this. This is why there is a need, and this is why black people, all black people, before you go down there and vote for any politician, you need to be asking for reparations because it is our government that has failed us. And as you said, SJ, the racism they have created to keep us down. And so getting back to that buffer class is that the main thing you got to understand, all these other people, they're trying to make their rights and their concerns come before our rights and our concerns. And they are backed. You can do your research on any of these platforms. Plenty of Asian people have said it. Plenty of Latin people have said it. Plenty of people from Southwest Asia have said it. They are given opportunities here. They are given business loans with no interest on it. And they are allowed, even if nobody shops in their store, they are allowed to write that whole thing off. The government will still fund their business and keep them in business. They are allowed to go out and get loans with hardly no interest so they can go and invest in real estate. They are encouraged to do this because it's one thing. The white people say, hey, we don't want you in our neighborhood selling your stuff or whatever, unless it's like a restaurant or a nail salon or something in that nature. But other than that, you go over there and you're allowed to prosper off of the black people in their neighborhoods. That way, that keeps the black people from building wealth. And so, just real quick, I'm gonna touch on this last thing and I'll give it back to you, SJ. The main thing about capitalism is you have to have an underclass. You have to have a class that are working peasants and they're stuck in that wheel. That's the whole thing about Western society. And since it's still in the books on the Constitution part that they don't read, they only read that one part.
All men and people are created equal.
The part that they don't read is the part about us where it's saying, hey, you will always be a slave. You could never be someone that could prosper or anything in this country. So that's why, as Dr. Claude Anderson, who wrote the great book Powernomics, and another great book he wrote was Black Labor, White Wealth, he simply stated, the black man has no rights or anything that the white man or white people will respect. And that's because it's on the books. And until that changes, and unfortunately, there's been a lot of politicians out there basically on one side and all this bullshit about,
Oh, yeah, well, I'm going to vote for the lesser of the two evils.
I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to say this, and you can get mad at the coach and never listen to me again. Both sides, or when it comes to us as a black person, if you are a black person in this country, both sides work hand in hand to handicap us. One side is a wolf, the other side is a rabid dog. So the rabid dog, every once in a while, them rabies kick in. They may act normal for a minute, but they're going to still bite you just as hard as that damn wolf is. There is no lesser for the two evils for us. You either for us or you against us. Just my opinion. Go ahead, SJ. I'll let you finish up.
Wow, coach. So, you really are convincing me to come around to that idea that the lesser of the two evils is just a trick. And I'm starting to really see, why, because of the way that you break things down. Another thing that I just learned today, that you taught me, and thank you for that, is, I always wondered, growing up where I grew up in an ethnic city and in an ethnic location, but it was not predominantly Black. It was a different ethnicity. And I always wondered, even as a child in elementary school, I wondered, why do they hate Black people, but they're so similar to us? And why are they more acceptable than us? We've been here in the United States. We've been Americans longer than these people who were actually fighting with America. So why are we so hated? And I could never understand it. But now that you've educated me about this buffer race, wow, that really breaks things down and makes a whole lot of sense. Because when you look at caste systems, class systems, economic systems, there's always got to be a hierarchy. Somebody's got to be at the bottom, somebody's going to be at the top. But I never really thought about what was going on in the middle. And I never really thought about the significance of that. So we're going to have to talk some more. I'm going to have to do some reading. I'm going to have to educate myself on this, because this answers a question that I've been asking myself for as long as I could critically think,
Yes.
because it was something that I noticed even as a child. And again, going back to what you were saying about, I was always a person of like compromise. That's in my nature, compromise. So I figured, okay, the lesser of the two evils gets us closer to what we actually want. But now I see that no, that's just a distraction. That's
Right.
just something to pacify and distract me. Now, me being who I am, I'm very persistent, I'm very tenacious. So that's not going to work on me. I'm not going to forget my original goal.
Right.
I maybe I'm too accepting of the fact that it's taking me a long time to get there. Maybe I need to push harder. Maybe I need to be more aggressive. Maybe I need to be less willing to compromise so that I can get a greater and a faster change.
Right.
But I'm really starting to see, and these are the reasons that they don't want us to have critical race theory. They don't want to
There you go.
they don't want to teach real American history. And I mean, come on, facts are facts. You know what I mean? You can't just wipe something, like you can't just wipe the Holocaust out of history because you don't like it. That
Right.
is a fact. That happened. I don't know how people could possibly try to deceive people and say that, oh, that never happened. That was a conspiracy. What about all of the people who lived through it and all of the people who did not? The
Right.
bubonic plague happened. COVID has happened. Imagine if 90 years from now, people are trying to say, oh, there was no such thing as COVID. There was no pandemic. Nothing happened.
Right. And that's what you have in this situation, with certain politicians, mainly in the South, who are trying to get rid of or hide these things. And then just one more other thing I just want to add. We're going to go a little bit deeper next time. I know we're kind of in the water, just knee deep, but we're going to do some swimming in the future here. So everybody just be patient. But getting back to the buffer class. Now, one thing I just want to say to kind of explain what you're talking about, SJ, and where you grew up. So another example of that, and I briefly mentioned in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, there were Italians who were migrating from Italy and Sicily over into America. Well, because of the region, especially if they came from the southern part of Italy and Sicily, they were very dark and had wavy hair. And it wasn't all, but a good percentage of them. So therefore, when they showed up on the shores here, they were basically the people didn't like them. You know what I mean? Because they looked too much like, I'll let you do it. You know who. So they were
They
like,
look too much like us.
and they, unfortunately, in places, they were treated badly. They were discriminated against. They were called certain names. And no matter how much people they tried to justify,
Hey, I'm Italian, speak this way, blah, 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 blah.
they were categorized and shunned out. Well, of course, we know the stories of what happened, what they did and how they tried to build themselves and get themselves out. But along with that, what did they have to do to win the darling of America's eyes was they had to lighten themselves up and they had to shun Black people. So in other words, getting back to what I was talking about earlier, when I was talking about riots going off in the northern cities, they were some of the main aggressors toward Black people because they wanted that white status. They wanted to be claimed as white people. Same way with the Irish. Once they turned their back against Black people or started attacking Black people, the next thing you know, hey, okay, you're one of us. You're white. And so kind of the same thing that you're saying about the city that you grew up in, that's kind of the same mode of operation that those people are having. They have been told, hey,
White is right, and we have to be this way in order to get claimed as white people in America.
one of the major things on the list, the first thing on the list you have to do is disassociate and reject Black people. And that's what they're doing. See what I'm saying? You want to say that you're better and you're this against them. And you have to show the other people, the white people, that you are going to be loyal to them. That's just basically a quick summation. But like I said, we'll get into it at another time more deeper in that. So anything else you want to add, SJ?
So much. That whole capitalism thing, yes, that's deep. I am definitely not a fan of capitalism, do not support capitalism, completely 100% against capitalism, but we'll definitely continue this at a later date because we definitely have more conversation.
Sure. And I'm glad, that helps. And for everybody that's out there that's a fan of our show, please feel free to drop a line in the comments of what you know about the timeline and how do you feel when you hear that term, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I would definitely like to hear what it is because I can tell you nobody in America has definitely pulled themselves up by the bootstraps. You have either known somebody or had somebody back you or something in that nature. You had a rich parent or something in that nature that helped you get to where you are in this country because that's just the way this country is and has evolved. So with that being said, please like, share, subscribe. I already told you to leave comments. And thank you so much for tuning in to the Shut Up and Work podcast. And we will see you on the next episode. Take care.